Jonestown, Guyana, November 18th, 1978. It's just, wow, over 900 people gone
Right.
in a single day. Just an unimaginable tragedy, really. And that name, Jonestown, it's become synonymous with this kind of unbelievable horror.
It's true. Jonestown is, well, it's almost a shorthand for cult tragedy, isn't it? And at the heart of it all, of course, you have Jim Jones and the People's Temple. But the thing is, when you really start digging into the temple's early days, back in the 50s and through the 60s and 70s, they were pushing some really radical ideas, especially for the time. I mean, they were all about racial justice and equality.
Yeah.
It's almost hard to believe, right, that a group so focused on, progressive ideals could end up responsible for so much destruction.
It is a strange juxtaposition, isn't it? But that message of inclusivity, that was a huge draw for a lot of people, especially back then. But then things changed. The temple moves to Guyana, and they set up this whole project, the People's Temple Agricultural Project, in '74. And that's the place we now all know as Jonestown. Now, we're not here to just rehash all the sensationalized stories, right? We've got a ton of sources here, news reports, historical accounts, the whole nine yards. And what we really want to do is understand what happened. What were the events that led to this? It's easy to get lost in all the information out there.
Right. We want to cut through the noise, to understand the factors that contributed to this unbelievable loss of life. I think our goal is to give you a clear picture of how it all actually unfolded. So I guess the best place to start is really at the beginning with Jim Jones himself.
Okay, so Jones, he's born in Indiana, and it seems like, well, religion played a big part in his early life. He goes on to found the People's Temple, also in Indiana, back in 1955. And his doctorate, well, they called it apostolic socialism. What exactly was that all about?
Well, think of it like this. Apostolic socialism. It was Jones's way of bringing together, well, fervent religious beliefs with socialist principles. It's a weird mix, right? I mean, the temple basically preached that traditional religion, all that stuff. It was just an opiate for the masses. And true enlightenment, reaching your full potential, that came through socialism. But of course, it had to be socialism guided by Jones himself. It was like he was offering a kind of salvation right here on Earth through communal living and his leadership.
It is a unique blend, for sure, this mixing of the spiritual and the political. And something we found in our research, which I have to say is kind of unsettling, is that Jones, he had this early admiration for some pretty troubling figures. I mean, we're talking Joseph Stalin, Mao Zedong, even Adolf Hitler. It's hard not to see that as a kind of warning sign, isn't it?
Absolutely. And this isn't just a random biographical detail, right? It's more than that. Jones's fascination with these leaders who demanded complete obedience, well, it really foreshadows what happens later on in Jonestown. He wanted that kind of power himself, that total control. And sadly, tragically, he got it.
Yeah. It definitely casts a shadow over everything, knowing that.
Huh.
So let's talk about the move to Redwood Valley, California in 1965. Now, that wasn't just a random decision, was it? What was behind that move?
Yeah, Redwood Valley. Well, that move was mainly a reaction to the pushback Jones was getting in Indiana. A lot of people weren't happy with his views on integration. California, at that time, it was seen as, as a more progressive place, more tolerant. So it was a way for him to protect his, racially diverse congregation, a kind of safe haven.
And from Redwood Valley, the temple's influence just explodes. They've got centers popping up in LA, San Francisco. Eventually, San Francisco becomes the headquarters. And their political involvement, wow, it goes through the roof. How does this group that seemed, well, a little unconventional, to say the least, how do they become such a force in mainstream politics?
It's kind of crazy, isn't it, to think about how much power they had. But see, under Jones, the temple was super organized, like a well-oiled machine. And they knew how to get people out to vote. They could swing an election. I mean, just look at George Moscone's mayoral campaign in '75. Everyone knew the temple's support was a big reason he won. And what happens? Moscone appoints Jones the chairman of the San Francisco Housing Authority. Talk about influence.
And it wasn't just local politics either. I mean, Jones had connections to some pretty big names on the national stage. Our research turned up names like Walter Mondale and Rosalind Carter. It's really pretty remarkable.
Right. It just goes to show you how deceiving things can be. On the surface, the temple was all about doing good, social justice, community empowerment. That's how Jones got all these influential people on his side. They didn't know, or maybe didn't want to know, what was really going on. Plus, I mean, they had a lot of people. They were a serious political force.
It makes you think, doesn't it, about how even people with good intentions can get caught up in something bad. So, okay, let's shift gears a little. Let's talk about the move to Guyana, to Jonestown. Now, this wasn't just some spur-of-the-moment thing. It was a plan, a contingency plan.
That's right. It all started in the fall of '73. Jones was facing more and more scrutiny. The media was on his case. Some temple members were starting to defect. So Jones and his lawyer, a guy named Timothy Stone, they started working on an escape plan. A way to get out if things got too hot. And Guyana, well, Guyana seemed like the perfect place.
So why Guyana? Why not somewhere else?
Well, for a few reasons. Guyana was a socialist country. And the temple, well, they considered themselves socialist too, so that was a plus. Plus, everyone spoke English, which made things a lot easier. And the government, it was led by black leaders. And that was really important because, most of the temple's members were black. It gave them this feeling of, well, like they'd be welcomed, that they'd be among their own.
And Jones himself, he saw Guyana as a place where he could really, really be in charge, a place where he could, escape the U.S. government and all the people who were after him.
Yeah, he was a master manipulator, that's for sure. He played the Guyanese government like a fiddle. He convinced them that the temple would be good for Guyana. They had Americans right there near the border with Venezuela, which was a hot spot at the time, and they were worried about being invaded. He made it seem like the temple would protect them.
So in 74, the deal is done. The temple gets a lease on this huge chunk of land, over 3,800 acres, right in the middle of the Guyanese jungle. Sounds pretty remote.
Oh, it was. Like way out there, about 150 miles from Georgetown. And the land itself, well, wasn't great. Bad soil, tough to grow anything. And to get water, you had to travel miles through the jungle. Not exactly paradise.
And yet that's what Jones promised, right? A socialist paradise, a safe haven from all the bad stuff back in the States. He even promised them they'd be self-sufficient, that they'd have everything they needed.
And you know what? The Guyanese government bought it. They actually made it easy for the temple to get people into the country. And they even made it hard for people to leave. Like if someone wanted to defect, they made it tough for them to get out. And they even stopped some people who were critical of Jones from getting visas to visit. A big mistake. A huge mistake.
It really is a story of how good intentions can go so wrong. So what was life actually like in Jonestown in those first few years, before all the craziness really started in 77?
It's kind of wild, actually. At first, they really did try to make it this, utopian community, a kind of communist society. But good, right? Everyone working together, everyone equal. But even then, Jones, he had to be in control. No one could leave without his say-so. That's a red flag right there.
And the temple, they made sure to be friends with all the right people in the government, right? Prime Minister Forbes Burnham, his wife Viola, all the bigwigs.
Oh, yeah. They played that game well. Temple members, they were always emphasizing how loyal they were to Burnham's party. And there were even rumors of, relationships between temple members and government officials.
That's about connection.
That's right. And it worked. Burnham himself, he said later that they trusted Jones because people like Moscone and Mondale and Carter, they all vouched for him. Talk about misplaced trust.
It's a reminder that, anyone can be fooled. So, okay, fast forward to the summer of 77. Hundreds of new people arrive, right? It's this mass migration. And that seems to be when things in Jonestown really start to go downhill.
You're exactly right. The place was already small, and then all these people show up. It was packed. And then Jones, he finally arrives. And that's when everything changes. Suddenly, it's all about work, 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 indoctrination, all those movies and stuff they used to watch. That's all gone. Now it's just Soviet propaganda all day long. And Jones, he's constantly lecturing them, going on and on about revolution and all his enemies.
So it becomes less about building this utopia and more about Jones being in charge. And the work schedule was brutal from what we've read. And Jones, he starts using all these mind control techniques, behavior modification stuff, like straight out of North Korea.
You're not kidding. Jones, he knew how to break people down. He wanted total obedience. So he starts controlling everything they see and hear. All the news they got was totally biased, made America look bad, and all the socialist countries look great.
Yeah.
And even when they watched movies, Jones had to be there to explain what it all meant. It was like living in a bubble, his bubble.
And all that stuff about being self-sufficient, well, that was a lie, wasn't it? The soil was terrible. They had to get everything shipped in. And the living conditions, they were just awful. Not exactly the paradise they were promised.
Nope. Not even close. And if you stepped out of line, even a little, Jones would come down on you hard. We're talking like locked in a tiny box for days. Or even, and this is just horrifying, he would make kids climb down into a well as punishment. The locals, they started hearing stories about what was happening. And Jones, he was getting paranoid. Anyone who tried to escape, he'd drug them.
And families were torn apart. Kids were taken from their parents and raised by the community. And Jones, he made everyone call him father or dad. What was the point of all that?
Control. Pure and simple. He wanted to be the only person they could rely on. He cut off those family bonds, made them dependent on him. That's
Yeah.
how he kept them in line.
And then there's the money. The temple was taking all the Social Security checks from its members. We're talking tens of thousands of dollars every month. But when the U.S. Embassy asked about it, no one said they were being forced. How do you explain that?
It's the power of fear, right? They were scared, terrified of what would happen if they spoke out. Plus, they were brainwashed. They believed Jones was the only one who could protect them. And don't forget, most of them were black. They'd faced racism and discrimination back in the U.S. Jones gave them a sense of belonging, even if it was all a lie.
Yeah, he knew how to exploit their vulnerabilities. And as things in Jonestown got worse, Jones himself, well, he just seemed to spiral. More paranoia, more drugs. What was that like for the people living there?
It was terrifying. Jones was convinced the U.S. government was going to attack them, wipe them out. He was giving these crazy speeches, ranting and raving about conspiracies. And he'd studied all these dictators, Hitler, Father Divine. He knew how to manipulate people.
And then there were the White Knights. They called them Omegas at first, then Alphas for a while. These weren't just regular meetings, right? This was something else.
Oh, yeah, something else entirely. It was psychological torture, basically.
Right.
Imagine this. It's the middle of the night, the alarm goes off, everyone has to rush to the pavilion, armed guards everywhere. Jones, he's up there screaming about how they're all going to die, how the enemy is coming, and the only way out is revolutionary suicide. He even made them practice, gave them this red liquid, and told them it was poison. Can you imagine being told you're about to die?
There was even one of these that went on for 6 days. 6 days. They called it the 6-day siege. He had them all convinced they were under attack, everyone armed, on edge. It was all about keeping them in a constant state of fear.
Exactly. Fear and dependence, that's how he controlled them. And get this, they've been stockpiling cyanide for a while, saying they needed it for some gold cleaning process. And there was talk of testing it on pigs. It's chilling, right? Like they were already preparing for something awful.
And then there was that whole custody battle, the Stone case, back in September of '77. That seemed to make Jones even more paranoid. That's what triggered that 6-day siege thing, right?
Yep, the Stone case was a big deal. Jones had adopted this kid, John Victor Stone, and then the parents, they wanted him back. And Jones, he flipped out. He thought he was going to be arrested, thrown in jail. And during all this, get this, Angela Davis and Huey Newton, they actually came out in support of Jones. Can you believe it? It just goes to show how good he was at playing the victim. He was even on the radio, saying they'd all rather die than be persecuted.
So after all this, Jones starts thinking about moving again. This time, he's looking at the Soviet Union, Cuba, even North Korea.
Yeah, he was desperate. He didn't even trust the Guyanese government anymore. He was meeting with the Soviets, sending them memos, the whole 9 yards. They even had this Soviet official, Fyodor Timofeyev, come visit Jonestown. And he gave this speech praising Jonestown as this amazing socialist paradise, called the Soviet Union their spiritual motherland. It was all very cozy.
But in the end, he decides to stay in Guyana. Why? Why not go to the USSR or somewhere else?
Well, Jones, he figured that in Guyana he had more power. It was a small country. He could basically do whatever he wanted. In the Soviet Union, he'd just be another cog in the machine. He wanted to be in charge. Meanwhile, back in the States, things were heating up.
Yeah, the concerned relatives, they were getting more and more vocal. This was a group of people who'd escaped from Jonestown, family members, people who were desperate to get their loved ones out, people like Tim and Grace Stone, Jeannie Mills. They were making a lot of noise.
Absolutely. They were writing letters, talking to politicians, doing anything they could to expose what was happening, and it started to work. Congressmen were starting to ask questions, including a guy named Leo Ryan.
And the media was catching on, too. Tim Reiterman, he wrote this article for the San Francisco Examiner all about the Stone custody case. It wasn't good for Jones. But even then, you had people like Harvey Milk, who Jones had helped get elected, sticking up for him. It's a messy situation.
It is. But the concerned relatives, they didn't give up. They put out this document, called it an accusation of human rights violations. And then one of the defectors, Deborah Layton, she filed this affidavit describing all the horrible things she'd seen, lawsuits for flying, accusations, the whole thing.
And Jones, he's getting desperate. So he brings in these two guys, Mark Lane and Donald Freed. They were known for their, well, let's just say their interesting theories about the Kennedy assassination.
Yeah, interesting is one way to put it. Jones paid them a lot of money to spread this idea that the CIA was out to get him. They held press conferences, the whole thing. It was all a big smoke screen,
Yeah.
trying to make Jones look like the victim.
So all of this, the pressure, the allegations, it finally gets to Congressman Leo Ryan. He decides to go to Guyana himself to see what's going on.
Yeah, Ryan, he was hearing all these stories from defectors, from families. He had to do something. So he goes to Guyana, takes Jackie Spire, his legal advisors, some reporters, some of the concerned relatives. It's a big deal.
At first, Jones tries to stop them. He doesn't want them anywhere near Jonestown. But Ryan, he's not giving up. So they finally get in. And it seems, pretty normal at first. They have this musical reception. But Jones, he's acting weird. You can hear it in the recordings.
Yeah, Jones was really putting on a show. They'd rehearsed everything, making sure everyone acted happy and content.
Yeah.
But some people, they couldn't take it anymore. That night, two of them, Vernon Gosney and Monica Bagby, they slip a note to one of the reporters, Don Harris, saying they want to leave with Ryan.
That took guts, to do that.
So Ryan and some of his people, they stay the night in Jonestown. The rest stay in Port Katuma, which was nearby. The next morning, more people say they want to leave with Ryan. Families, the whole thing. Jones, he lets them go, but you can tell he's not happy about it. And then it just explodes. One of the temple members, Don Sly, he attacks Ryan with a knife. Luckily, Ryan wasn't hurt, but it was a sign of things to come. They all head to the airstrip to get out of there. And one of the temple loyalists, Larry Layton, he's Deborah Layton's brother, he insists on going with them. That's when things get really bad.
The airstrip, that's where it all went down. It was an ambush.
Yeah, Ryan and his people, they're getting ready to board these two planes. Layton, he's already on the smaller plane and he starts shooting. Wounds a couple of the defectors. And at the same time, this group of temple guards, they call themselves the Red Brigade, they open fire on the bigger plane. They killed Ryan, two reporters, Don Harris and Bob Brown, a photographer, Greg Robinson, and one of the defectors, Patricia Parks. Jackie Spire, she was shot too, and a bunch of others. It was a massacre. Jones had given the order, no one was to leave Jonestown alive.
Back in Jonestown, it was the end. Marceline Jones, she's on the loudspeaker making announcements. They're getting ready.
They had this big vat filled with Flavor Aid, mixed with cyanide and a bunch of other drugs. The temple doctor, Larry's shocked he'd been planning this. Jones, he calls everyone to the pavilion one last time. They recorded it all, the death tape. It's chilling.
Jones, he's saying the plane with Ryan is going to crash. He's talking about revolutionary suicide. One woman, Christine Miller, she tries to argue with him. She says they should fly to the Soviet Union. But no one listens. They know Ryan is dead.
The guards, they're all around the pavilion, and then they start poisoning people.
Mm-hmm.
A mother, Roletta Paul, and her baby, they were the first, injecting them with the poison. It's just awful. There are stories from survivors, people who were there. Some people didn't want to do it, but in the end, over 900 people died. Most of the kids, they were gone in 5 minutes.
On the tape, Jones, he's talking about how this is a dignified death, that it's better than what's waiting for them out there. They find him later, dead from a gunshot. Suicide.
And it wasn't just Jonestown. In Georgetown, at the temple's headquarters, Sharon Amos, she gets a message from Jonestown. And she kills her 3 kids, then herself.
It's just so much death, so much pain. The aftermath, it must have been overwhelming. Finding all those bodies, identifying them, trying to make sense of it all.
The only person who was really held accountable was Larry Layton, the guy who shot up the plane. He went to prison. The State Department, they took a lot of heat for how they handled the whole thing. And a new organization was formed, the Cult Awareness Network, to try to prevent something like this from ever happening again. But for the survivors, for the families, the pain never really goes away. And some of them, they've had more tragedies since then.
And you know how it is with something this big, this horrific. The conspiracy theories start flying, people saying the CIA was behind it or the KGB, but none of that has ever been proven. There is a memorial now in Oakland, California, at Evergreen Cemetery, a place to remember the victims.
It's important to have a place like that, to remember. And it's interesting, our research turned up something recent. Just last December, they announced plans to maybe open up Jonestown as a tourist attraction. Can you believe that? Of course, a lot of people are upset about it. It's still such a raw wound. And with the 50th anniversary coming up in 2028, well, Jonestown is going to be back in the news again.
It's a story that just stays with you, doesn't it? It's hard to wrap your head around it all. This community, they started out with these ideals, these hopes for a better world, and it all went so terribly wrong.
It does make you think, how could something that started out, with good intentions, how could it end up like that? Was it revolutionary suicide, like Jones said? Or was it mass murder? I don't know. It's something people are still arguing about today. And for the survivors, for the families, there's still so many unanswered questions, so much pain. And this idea of turning Jonestown into a tourist attraction, well, It just shows you how difficult it is to deal with something like this. How do you remember something so horrific without exploiting it?
It's a tough question, that's for sure. So as we wrap up our deep dive, let's leave you with something to think about. What does the story of Jonestown tell us about ourselves? About the power of belief, the dangers of blind faith? It's a reminder that we always need to be questioning, to be thinking for ourselves, to be wary of anyone who claims to have all the answers. Because sometimes the things that seem the most appealing, the most promising, well, they can lead to the darkest places.